Hello, welcome to the fourth Fall 2025 Northeast Cover Crops Council webinar. I'm Victoria Ackroyd, NECCC Program Manager. My co-host is Susan Brulette, Program Manager for the Northwest Crops and Soils Program at UVM Extension. Before I introduce today's speakers, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat as they come to mind, and I'll handle the question and answer session at the end. Today's session counts for one Crop Management CCA CEU. To get credit, please email your full name and CCA number to Susan. I'll put her email address in the chat shortly, or you can just direct that information to Susan directly in the chat. This webinar is being recorded and will be available as soon as the UVM and NECCC websites get it up. And now for today's speakers. Dr. Reed is an extension educator of agronomy at Penn State. She provides research-based educational programming based on local grower interests and needs, including corn, soybean, and small grain production, soil health and cover crops, soil fertility management, hay production and pasture management, and pesticide safety. Today, Heidi will be speaking about the use of drones to interseed cover crops. Jeff Sanders is an agronomy specialist with UVM Extension. He has worked with the Northwest Crops and Soils team since June 2012, helping to foster best management practices on dairy farms and improve water quality with the Agronomy and Conservation Assistance Program. Jeff brings to the Northwest Crops and Soils program years of experience as an agricultural service provider and dairy farm manager. His expertise is in reduced tillage systems, cover cropping practices, soil health, nutrient management planning, and interseeding, the latter of which he will also be talking about today. Jeff and Heidi, thank you both for joining us to talk about cover crops and interseeding. You have the floor.
Thank you. I think I'm gonna shoot first here, and I'm gonna share my screen. And that's working. Yes, I'm Jeff Sanders. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes today about interseeding cover crops. And we've done quite a bit of that over the years. So this is a little bit of a view from Vermont, and I'll share some of our findings. And so why interseed is jump right in and talk about why we might want to interseed. And up here near the 45th parallel, one reason is our growing season is quite short. It takes about 2,800 growing degree units to grow a full term crop of corn, and depending on where you are, we have 1,800 to 2,800. So corn tends to get harvested quite late in the fall, which does not leave much time to establish a viable cover crop. We have a colder climate. We have highly variable soils, from lake plain soils to mountain rocks, and everything in between. And also, interseeding provides a lot of opportunities for diversity in the cover crop, and and so this is part of what has brought us to where we are today and the work that we've done. We have some publications, and listed here is one of our larger projects. We had a CIG grant, a national CIG grant, I think around 2019, and we worked on 30 farms over 3 years, interseeding 13 to 1,500 acres per year. We did that with a high boy. And so also over the years, we've acquired our vision is that we want to provide every opportunity to establish cover crops from as early in the season as possible, straight through to post harvest. So through generous grant opportunities provided by the state and the federal government, we've acquired a lot of equipment over the years. We don't have all that equipment now, but we've tried interseeding every way possible. So, and we've utilized SARE funding and other funding opportunities as well. So, and here's a picture of an interseeded cover crop. that people are probably familiar with. So reasons why you would interseed cover crops. I think most folks on this Zoom is understand soil health, nutrient management, environmental quality, weed suppression, public perception, which I think is important. We live in the Lake Champlain Basin. Our A lot of the farmers we work with are here, and also there's some other impaired waterways where public perception that the farming community is active in trying to reduce their impact on the environment, and cover crops actually do serve that purpose of trying to help the public understand that farmers are working with them, not against them. And also there's a grazing potential as well. This slide shows a picture of the Hagee Highboy, which we acquired for that project, and what we used for doing much of that 1,500 acres a year all over northern Vermont. And so those are some of the reasons why there. That's not an exclusive list or all inclusive. There's other reasons too, but those are the major ones. Um, so so we think about interseeding. This is actually the right time of year to be thinking about next year's cover cropping. Um, so you need to plan way ahead to get things organized for interseeding. And uh, here's a short list of some of the things that we've seen. Earlier establishment. It's very important to get the cover crops in. And when, like this year, people are still harvesting corn, although most of it's done, but most of the corn came off this year because of the extremely dry summer we had and extremely wet spring we had about 10 days ago. So from here on out, trying to establish a viable cover crop, we can get a cover crop to grow, but it's not going to meet a lot of the uh, desires or goals that we have for even doing it, because there's so little time left for it to establish. And so in interseeded cover crops, we can get much better biomass. For one study we did, we had 1.4 uh, mg per hectare versus a post harvest much lower. And also for erosion control, having that biomass there. We have a lot of slope fields in northern Vermont, so definitely a consideration. And also a big thing is the really post harvest, you're limited to rye or wheat for a cover crop. That's pretty much it. And while those have certain characteristics we may want, uh, having the ability to interseed legumes and brassicas, different grasses, we need to do that via interseeding. So that's kind of a major advantage of interseeding, is just the up north anyway, is the ability to play with it some, and you can get your brassicas in for compaction, and you can get your ryegrass in for rooting, and so on. um and also the interseeding process mitigates the fall weather. We've been very dry, but we got 3.5 inches of rain 2 days ago, and it's pouring now. So um, the ability to get out in the fields and do any more. I had a fella call this morning who wanted to use a grain drill, and he called this morning and said, you better just forget the grain drill, because you're not going to put cover crops out at this point. We've had too much water. So it just interseeding opens up the window so much more than post harvest. And so so the risk of interseeding, if you do it super early, you might lose some corn yield. Um, where post harvest, obviously, you don't risk yield, you risk the cover crop. Uh, and then the big one, which we found in our project, CIG project, is really herbicide residuals. And broadleafs are sensitive to corn. Post harvest doesn't eliminate this conflict, but it does reduce it. But in the north, it may be unique to this area, but custom operators apply all the herbicides. And so a major struggle that we found was getting the spray operators to change the mix and clean the tanks for um, putting down a suitable spray program that wouldn't impede the interseeded cover crop. And um, we did struggle with that. Even when we paid for the herbicide, we struggled with it. So I think like now, like that's why I'm saying like now is the time to start planning, pick the fields that you're going to do, and come up with a plan for the herbicide program on those fields. I guess when the farmer has more control over it, this goes better. But in an area where there's a heavy reliance on custom operators, this is probably one of the larger threats to that interseeded cover crop. And also the equipment needs for interseeding, they're specialized. So you would have to acquire that equipment. If you're going to, particularly if you're going to drill, you can just throw the seed out with a spreader, which may work to some degree. But if you want to get good soil to seed contact, you have to have a specialized piece of cover cropping equipment. So some things to think about there. Here's a picture of a couple of mid-season interseeded cover crops. You can see that they're drilled in rows, and this is one particular type of machine that we used. We had another one that would kind of air apply and then stir it in, and that one did that machine did a little bit better job of getting coverage across the inner row. Uh, so you get varying degrees of establishment, and in 2021 with our CIG project across a whole bunch of acres, our trial and our controls, we probably had 1,300 acres. Our lowest biomass reading was 19 pounds per acre, right? A total bomb. And the same mix somewhere else produced 3,186 pounds of biomass. So so there's a lot of variability in interseeded cover crop results. And so uh, trying to figure out where that variability is coming from and trying to control for it is that's something that we need to continue to work on. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But this is some of the equipment that we've used. So I started in 2012, and Heather Darby came up with this idea that we were going to get a helicopter to do cover crops, and we threw it together. So somehow the money came through, and we hired a helicopter to help us cover crop. And like the very first day that we were in the field, the helicopter had a quote unquote hard landing, and they put the kibosh to that helicopter, and then we got another helicopter, and um, we we com- we commenced. I think we cover cropped like 5,000 acres with a helicopter that year or the next year. I don't remember, but we loaded it all with 5-gallon pails. It was a ton of work. So, um, helicopter, high boy we've used. Uh, these drills are these are interseeders. Some people would call them a drill, but they're specialized. They have the wide row spacing. They're high so that the corn can pass between the rows, and they work quite well. It's just it is time consuming. So I would say for sure that interseeding is not for the faint of heart. It's not particularly easy to do it to do it right. It takes a lot of planning and strategy and field selection, um, a lot going on. And so the idea of interseeding is that it opens up the opportunities uh, to explore different the role that different uh, cover crops can have in the field, in the soil, on the soil, the microbes and all of that. And here's a little chart that we made for a booklet that we produced that just shows uh, the advantages and where certain types of cover crops do better, and depending on what your goals are, and winter rye. And the other thing is that every cover crop for has advantages. It also has some disadvantages, and everybody loves winter rye for all the things it does do, but the farmers that use conventional tillage struggle with termination. And if you get into a really wet spring and you can't manage it, and if you don't terminate it quick enough, it'll ruin um it'll ruin that farmer's view of cover cropping, because it'll significantly degrade the subsequent cash crop if that stuff gets 5 6 feet tall and they can't manage it. And we here at UVM, we have equipment that can manage 5 or 6 foot tall cover crops, but um, we have a roller crimper, and that works really well. But that's not available to everybody everywhere. So a farmer will run into an emergency situation and get really frustrated. And so every everything's got trade-offs, and it's all about management. I would say for sure. Also, winter rye, I think, interseeded earlier in the summer, uh, struggles some with the heat and all. It's better to do a little. And I'm not going to go through everything on this list. It's in that publication, but triticale is also a very good crop. It's a lot more money than winter rye, so it's just you have to know what your goals are, and help the farmer, the producer, identify the goals and the cost and the benefits when you're working with them. So we've used all of these in mixes around Vermont, and had varying degrees of success with each of them. Um, so in Vermont, in northern climates, there's a few things that we've done. We've done early interseeding. We've seeded at V4. We've seeded at V2. When you have so much ground to cover, you've got to start. And sometimes the corn's planted late, because corn's not all planted at the same time either when you're doing these broad, large scale implementation projects. So you see the whole gamut. And but we had a lot of luck with like a clover radish ryegrass mix. That was kind of our go-to mix, about 25 pounds per acre. So the other thing about interseeding is you can drastically, because of the varieties you use, you can drastically reduce the amount of weight that you have. It's all pounds per acre, which we can talk about pounds per acre versus seeds per acre, but how NRCS looks at it is pounds per acre. And winter rye or winter wheat at 75 pounds to the acre drilled is a lot more logistical uh complicated versus a mix of 25 pounds of annual rye clover and brassica. So interseeding is definitely has its benefits in that area as well. It takes a lot less seed. or less pounds of seed. I'm not saying less seed, but and then late interseeding, we've done to August, September, which it just when you do it at that time of year, you're not really looking to establish it. But when the corn comes off, it's already there, and the equipment kind of works it into the soil, so you get a very quick, uh, explosive growth after the corn comes off because the seed's already there. And obviously, you're always trying to the wet time it with a rain event if you can. But that's so I'll just briefly mention that the weather plays a huge role in the success of interseeded cover crops. And if it comes off hot and dry, you're gonna it's gonna likely struggle. If you select interseeded cover crops that don't do well in the shade, they're going to struggle. And if the herbicide program has a lot of residual or even very much residual, certain species of cover crop are going to suffer. We've gone to fields where we interseeded ryegrass, clover, and brassica, and one or two of those varieties would be not a single plant growing, but the third variety was fine. And I attribute that to herbicide, whatever they put down, if there's a broadleaf or whatever. But so it's super important that we pay attention to these things. So corn management, you know, if usually we're growing these interseeded cover crops in our area in a cash crop is corn, once in a while soybean. Uh, the combines here do not like anything green going through them when they're harvesting the soybean, so those would be interseeded quite late in the season. But we've done wide row corn. I love wide row corn. I You can get super good cover crops in 60-inch rows, and some of the work that we've done, you don't take if you use a fixed ear corn variety, you don't suffer much yield loss. And with the modern planters, you can up the population in the rows, so you can almost maintain that 30,000 plants per acre. You're just putting it into two rows instead of four rows, let's say. And with a fixed year, the yields, we have seen yield loss, but we've also seen no yield loss. So and the cover crops do awesome in that scenario. And then I think that's where our best opportunity to graze is, like, because there's a lot of biomass on in that system. It does create a little bit of a funky when they go to harvest it with the Kemper heads. It can, because the corn's not flowing the way it normally does. They have to kind of adjust a little bit. But um, the population, if we're reducing the population to, let's say, 30,000, what we're doing there is we're just trying to allow more sunlight to get down to the soil surface to help stimulate the growth of that cover crop. And then obviously hybrids. We did some work with vertical architecture versus horizontal with the leaf structure. Um, there's also, and we did some studies with light. And also there is, which we haven't done that I know of in depth, orientating the fields east west versus north south. So um, to try to get sunlight up and down the rows. And then we've done case studies, that show that you get a lot more biomass on 60-inch rows. And so it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat to see how things will grow when the conditions are suitable. And for the most part, when you're interseeding in a conventional system, there's always some limiting factor. But as we try to remove the limiting factors, the cover crops can do super well. And so that it's kind of neat, but you got to have a lot of buy-in from the producer. Um, so there are, so obviously I've kind of been hinting at this. There's some risk in interseeding. There's competition with the corn. We've seen that in the early interseeded stuff, uh, cover crop, and herbicide residual is probably the from a producer input point of view, that's the largest risk factor. It can be controlled 100%, but it takes management. So um, there's there's establishment issues due to light and moisture, and you can kind of try to offset that by increasing the seeding rates, but that doesn't always work either. And obviously drought and excessive rain. And I think drought is a bigger issue than excessive rain, from what I've seen over the years. We've seen cover crops that we think we hit a home run on. They come up 6 inches, look great. You come back in a month, there's nothing there, and that's when it dries out. It cannot get moisture, and it dies. So um, there is some risk in that. Uh, Organic systems with no herbicide use mixes like buckwheat and clover for weed control. I will say that interseeding, one of the management factors that we have to pay attention to are the inherent weed situation in the field. Weedy fields are not suitable for interseeded cover crops. You need clean fields, and by interseeding in a clean field, it'll help keep the field clean from weeds. But interseeding in a weedy field is it like just aggravates the weed problem. It's not helpful. So you have to select field. You got to take care of the weed problem and then do the interseeding. So I will say that. Obviously, there's some environmental challenges, which we've talked about: sunlight and soil moisture. And then how you mitigate that is wide rows if you can, reduce the population, use short residual herbicides, and time seedings. It was funny when we were doing our project, the CIG project, we picked the herbicide program, and it was a not a very expensive program. It had a Resolve Q and glyphosate, and that was it. And people had better weed control with that in an interseeded field than they had with their 70-80 dollar um mix that had all kinds of stuff in it. Those fields were still weedy, and the Resolve Q in the glyphosate in certain fields, which was very inexpensive, fared very well, and the interseeded cover crops did well in those fields. So um, herbicide definitely something to pay attention to. So I mean, that's kind of a brief, quick overview of some cover crops in Vermont, and I think that interseeding is viable. I think that it definitely improves soil health and nutrient retention and weed suppression in certain circumstances. But it just adds a lot of flexibility to your cover crop program. And when it's done right, you'll get a lot more biomass in post harvest. Um, it is it does work well where you have short seasons, cropping seasons, if you can mitigate the risk. Uh, Wide rows are we for a few years we had people doing it. The last couple years have been less, but it definitely works, and there is some continued interest in it. Upright varieties, um, with the leaves that point up, or to try to get sunlight down to the soil surface again, super important. And and having the right equipment to do it with, which Heidi's going to talk about next, as far as drone stuff, um, really gives you a lot better opportunity to be successful. And the economics, you can save $10 to $25 an acre in nitrogen, and that's depending on what you're seeding, obviously. And there's a huge opportunity, I think, as I think Vermont's pivoting a little bit away from dairy these days, and the beef business is building. I think there's going to be opportunities for some intensive grazing on these cover crops uh, in the fall to extend the forage period for their animals uh, going forward. I think it will work. So, with that, there's some references here at the bottom of this slide that people could check out that go into a lot more depth on the topics that I touched on. But with that, I'll turn it over to Heidi.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. That was a really great overview of interseeding into corn, and I hope that my presentation is a nice complement coming from the soybean side. So can you see and hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about what we've learned at Penn State Extension over the past 5 years through a Pennsylvania Soybean Board funded project. I will focus mostly on the drone seeding aspect, but we did do some ground-based broadcast seeding as well that feeds into our conclusions about this practice. Okay, great. So just to orient you to where we're located, compared to Vermont, significantly warmer, significantly more growing degree days. I'm personally located down here in southeastern Pennsylvania. So in zone 7A, 7B, where we grow a fair number of double crop soybeans. So that is soybeans that are planted after small grain harvest, whether barley or wheat. And so what that means is that soybean harvest tends to be pushed back into the year. And if we want to establish a cover crop, just like Jeff mentioned, we are limited with our options. So if we would like to establish cover crop after soybeans, and you're all probably familiar with the cover crop selector tool shown here, we are stuck, seeding basically cereal rye or winter wheat maybe into November, depending on how late harvest goes. In more northern parts of the state where they don't do double crop soybeans, their full season soybeans are harvested sometimes that late. So that limits our options. And to expand options, we were thinking, broadcast interseeding into standing soybeans could be a viable practice. And lots of anecdotal evidence from farmers doing this around the state that they're having some success with it, but hasn't been widely studied, and so we set out to quantify some aspects of this. So the project was initiated in 2020, and we set out, first of all, just to see which cover crop species are going to work for this practice. And then we moved on to comparing, does broadcasting give us a benefit compared to post-harvest seeding? Because that's the real question, right? That's what farmers want to know. It's like, yes, this might work, but let's compare it to my standard practice and see how effective it is. And then in the most recent phase, we were looking specifically at drone seeding cereal rye and hairy vetch into standing soybeans. And our measurement of success for establishment, the parameters we were measuring were cover crop density, so plants per square foot in the fall and the spring, ground cover as measured with an NDVI, a handheld NDVI device called a Green Seeker, or in later years, the Canopio app. to give us a green ground cover reading, as well as biomass in the spring. And we just wanted to see, how successful can we be with these various cover crops. So really simplifying everything that we learned from this project and trying to narrow it down into the brass tacks, what we really learned across the 5 years and 23 site years of this study. For broadcasting in general, this isn't just for drone seeding, which species worked well. And so we evaluated cereal rye, moving left to right, and from the top to the bottom, cereal rye, rapeseed, hairy vetch, winter wheat, forage radish, crimson clover, annual ryegrass, balansa clover, and red clover. You may notice that 2 of those pictures look like stock images, and that's because these clovers down here in the bottom, the balansa and the red clover, never established at all. I couldn't get any pictures of them because they did not work for us. They were looked at over several site years on farm and on research farms. Broadcasting these clovers did not result in any measurable biomass or, plants per square foot over multiple site years. And a farmer is not going to pay for seed that's not going to grow. I should say that we did vet these cooperator farms and our research farm plots to make sure that residuals wouldn't be an issue. But it is possible, as Jeff mentioned, those residuals can be a problem specifically for legumes, our small seeded legumes specifically. And it's possible that something slipped through the cracks and some of those failures could have been associated with residual. But I'll also say that the rapeseed did not perform well for us. So, after multiple failures and, a couple sites where we might have gotten 1 to 200 pounds of biomass, we just eliminated those species from the trial moving forward because we found that it wasn't worth the money to put them out. And then we had a couple of species that were kind of middling. So our forage radish or tillage radish and crimson clover. The crimson clover we found just really tends to like that seed to soil contact of post-harvest drill seeding or broadcast incorporation compared to being broadcast and sitting on the soil surface. And then we just eliminated the forage radish because even though it's a species that farmers tend to include in their broadcast mixes, we were specifically looking at overwintering species, so we did eliminate that. And then you won't be surprised by the big winners. Species that did excellently were cereal rye and winter wheat. And then behind those were annual ryegrass and hairy vetch. And you can imagine, if we're thinking specifically about drone seeding, why these species that did perform the best might cause us a little bit of heartburn, right? Thinking about the seeding rate that we do need to use when we broadcast, the weight of those seeds, and the current capacity of drones that we have. So we'll discuss that a little more as the presentation goes on. So this is just, some data that we did, some representative data looking at the density in the fall and in the spring of these various species in the first part of the study. And you can see that cereal rye, these winter grasses just tended to outperform all the others consistently. So then when we started to compare broadcast establishment, broadcast interseeding by whatever method, be it drone, be it a spinner spreader, be it a high clearance fertilizer spreader, custom applicator, when we started comparing, in my opinion, we just lacked the site years to really draw broad conclusions about this. So we only have 4 site years. However, about half of the time there was a benefit to broadcast interseeding. compared to post-harvest seeding, whether with a drill or broadcast incorporate. And then about a quarter of the time, there was a benefit to the post-harvest seeding compared to the interseeding. And then one of the 4 site years, there was no difference. So obviously we don't have the 30 farms over 3 years like that trial you had up in Vermont that would really provide more data that we could generalize over a larger area. But you know, what my take home from this again is that in some situations, broadcast interseeding into standing soybeans can be as successful as post-harvest establishment. And once again, our most successful species were our cereal rye and winter wheat. However, even though these were our most successful species, when we look at the biomass values, they did tend to sit around this, you know, 750 to 1,000 pounds of dry matter per acre, which is less than what NRCS would want to see for soil protection, and less than a farmer would want to see as, you know, getting bang for their buck out of the cover crop for weed suppression, or, you know, especially if they're trying to get some forage out of this. So let's talk specifically about drone seeding. So we worked with drone applicators, you know, targeting the first seeding at just the initiation of leaf yellowing, and then planting, you know, every 2 weeks for a total of 3 drone seeding dates. And then those were compared to a post-harvest seeding as well. We did this with rye in 1 year across 4 sites, and with hairy vetch in 1 year across 5 sites. And we found some differences between how these 2 cover crops behaved, and they probably won't be too surprising to you. So when we're looking at plant density, so the number of cereal rye plants per square foot, drill seeding after soybean harvest far and away outperformed drone seeding, regardless of drone seeding date, in the fall and in the spring. And, you know, for cereal rye, drone seeding earlier didn't really help the number of plants per square foot. For our cereal rye, we did see more fall ground cover. So these blue bars are showing our fall ground cover in percent green cover as measured with Canopeo. Blue is in the fall, and then orange is in the spring for our 3 different drone seeding dates compared to our post-harvest drill seeding. You can see there's a downward trend in ground cover the later in the year that we plant, regardless of method. But that trend really disappears by the spring. And if you've worked with cover crops, you know how quickly cereal rye can grow and compensate in the spring. However, when we look at hairy vetch, we didn't see quite as clean a trend in the fall. But in the spring, we saw a benefit to drone seeding. Just getting that cover crop established earlier provided better ground cover. And then when we look at spring biomass for cereal rye, we can see that there's you know, no significant difference between these seeding dates and treatments. However, for hairy vetch, the earlier we seeded, the more biomass that we saw in the spring. So there was a benefit to drone seeding. I'm running out of time. I want to leave time for questions, so I'm going to quickly go through here. This is just listing, you know, different sites, not broken out by site year. Some of these had multiple years, but these are our dry matter for these different cover crop species, and you can see how abysmal these clovers specifically did for us, as well as our rapeseed. So let's cut those out and just focus on the ones that we really like. So our rye, wheat, annual ryegrass, and vetch. And what did these higher biomass situations have in common? They were planted early, followed within a couple of days by like half an inch of rainfall. And I have tried to run some models, multivariate regression, try to come up with a model to explain, the optimum situation for each of these. And we just don't have the site year. We don't have the data available. So considering fall growing degree days, spring growing degree days, fall and spring rainfall, total growing degree days, so on and so forth. And nothing is coming out as a clean indicator of these are your set of parameters that you need to meet to have a successful drone seeded or broadcast seeded cover crop. So I'm still working on that and hopefully can find someone better at stats than I am to help me break through that wall, but we just need more data simply. To wrap up here quickly, looking at budget comparison, which would be important for farmers, this is going to depend on whether they own equipment or have to custom hire, what type of seed they're planting, and how many seeds per acre or pounds per acre they're planting. But it is something to consider. You do need to plant more seeds per acre when you broadcast than when you do any kind of incorporation, just because you get a better stand when you have seed soil contact. So situations where drone seeding can work, when your quick fall ground cover is your priority, specifically when you want to delay termination in the spring or plant green. Sites where we had later spring termination, that cover crop just had more time to add biomass. Non-weedy fields, Jeff emphasized this. This is not a practice for fields where weeds are an issue. They're a big problem, and that's something that I can definitely vouch for. Cereal rye, wheat, hairy vetch, or annual ryegrass are your preferred species. In a situation where you have double crop soybeans or soybeans that are harvested very late, irrigated fields, which we don't have very many of in Pennsylvania. And I do not recommend this practice based on our data. If you are broadcasting within a month of soybean harvest, you might as well wait till after harvest to plant, because there would be no benefit to broadcasting. And then clovers, just in our experience, did not perform well. So I'll leave these conclusions up for a minute, and I guess invite Victoria and Jeff back on, and maybe we can answer some questions. But final thought is, yes, variability. Jeff mentioned, I can second for that. Variability with broadcasting and interseeding is a big issue. Dependence on timely rainfall and perfect weather conditions. Yes, we have the same issue. Weeds taking over, dominating, suppressing the cover crop, huge issue and a barrier to adoption. So this practice can work, but it's not suited for every field and every farm. So I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you both, Heidi and Jeff. Great presentations. So just jumping into questions. So far, there's only one question in the chat, and you guys are certainly welcome to either put your hand up or just unmute yourself. But the one question that's in the chat is, Jeff, are you looking into interseeding compatibility with short stature corn in Vermont?
We haven't. I'm not aware that we have looked at short stature corn. I think that in our cropping system is 90% corn silage, which I should have mentioned before. Very little picking corn. We're feeding cows, and my initial thought on that is that a short stature corn probably wouldn't be welcomed by the producer who's trying to fill his bunk. But I mean, the starch levels would be high, which is good, but they need tonnage too. So I'm not aware that we've looked at that specifically.
Thank you. So just a final reminder that today's session does count for one crop management CCA CEU. And if you do need that credit, please either send your full name and CCA number to Susan. Her email is in the chat, or just chat to her directly that information. With that said, I mean, are there any other questions in the audience? Feel free to either unmute or raise your hand.
Victoria, this is Ken.
Hey!
Down in Maryland, how we doing? Good, good.
What's up?
Enjoyed both presentations. Just a little anecdotal thing about the broadleaves and broadcasting into soybeans. And, you have to get them on early for them to work. But what we noticed was we had conditions for germination that looked really favorable. And we were looking in the canopy and said, "Oh, look, the clover or the radishes, the rapeseed, they all came up." But what happens in low light with the broadleaves is, I guess, the meristem is not at the top, like, or not at the base. It's an apical meristem, unlike the grasses. So they get stretched, super stretched out in the dark. And then when the leaves drop and the light comes through, they're like this thread of a stem, and they don't survive. So it's almost like they germinate, because we were thinking, oh man, we're doing great. And then they just all died as soon as the leaves dropped and they were exposed to full light. So it's almost like the basal, whereas the grasses have that basal meristem, and they can get real leggy, but it doesn't wipe them out. When the light comes, then they can sort of start going. So that was just an observation we had, and we kind of abandoned it early because it was kind of, we're trying to figure out a way how we're going to get around this, and we just said, well, I don't know that we can get around this because we have to wait so late to have that not happen, and then like you said, it's hardly worth doing it that late. Might as well just wait and drill it. So that was just an observation. So anyway.
Interesting. So a possible mechanism there for what might be going on. Very cool. Other questions, comments? I've got a question, Heidi. So I'm associated with University of Maryland, and I actually live about 35 miles from Washington, D.C., which has a massive aerial exclusion zone because of the Congress critters and whatnot, meaning planes have to stick to very certain areas, and you can get in a lot of trouble if you don't do the right paperwork before flying a drone for any reason. Do you run into that much up in your neck of the woods? I mean, the state has a capital. I'm trying to remember where southeastern PA versus the state capital of Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh?
Harrisburg.
Harrisburg. Sorry.
Come on. The booming metropolis of Harrisburg. No, that's a said, and I apologize to participants if anyone was looking for like technical stuff about drones specifically. I'm not a drone operator.
Oh,
I was
oops,
just
sorry.
involved in this project. But from my experience talking with drone operators, it has taken off like wildfire down here, not just for cover crops, but for spraying fungicides, and also just for like imaging purposes. But there can be issues. We have many small little regional airports around, but as long as drone pilots have to adhere to the FAA rules, and they have to be in communication with local airports, and it hasn't been a problem. It has been an annoyance at a couple locations, but it didn't prevent the use of the drone in our experiment at all. But you know, drones are challenging. I mentioned the carrying capacity, or the payload, right?
Yeah.
For if you want to plant a bushel of cereal rye, and you can carry 100 pounds of payload, in addition to the drone itself, you can seed, 2 acres of cereal rye, and then you're reloading the hopper. And it can be, these guys that do it regularly have gotten really slick and like quick at it. They change the battery, they fill the hopper with seed, and they like boop boop boop, it goes on its track again. The battery life is improving, that technology. The capacity of the drones, the payload of the drones is improving, and they're getting cheaper. I think the practice is only going to continue to spread as the tech improves, but there is red tape, and yeah, just people need to be aware of it. I think it's a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. And I would expect the drone operators know how to handle that paperwork and whatnot. I know that you can certainly buy them privately nowadays to fly as well. Any other questions, comments, experience, thoughts?
I'll just add to the drone. We actually use a drone to fly a red edge camera over the cover crops, and
Mhm.
the drone operator had to file flight plans every time we flew with the FAA.
Yeah.
So and then when we were in Burlington or around the airport, it got a little bit more complicated. Um, so yeah, it's a thing for sure.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. All right. Any last questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Well, in that case, we may as well give you back 4 minutes of your day. I'd like to thank Heidi and Jeff again for speaking today and everyone for attending. We do hope to see you next week. We'll be hearing from Charlie White at Penn State about cover crops and nutrient dynamics. And with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their week. And I'm going to stop recording as soon as I can locate the button. There we go. And